If you really want to hear about it, the first thing you'll probably want to know is where I was born, and what my lousy childhood was like, and how my parents were occupied and all before they had me, and all that David Copperfield kind of crap. But I don't feel like going into it if you want to know the truth. In the first place, that stuff bores me. And in the second place, my parents would have about 2 hemorrhages apiece if I told anything pretty personal about them.
That voice. If you've read this book, you felt it the moment you heard that voice again. And if you haven't, you just felt something. You can hear a 16-year-old boy in that paragraph. A specific 16-year-old boy, not a type, not a symbol, an actual person. Nobody else in American literature sounds like Holden Caulfield. Nobody before Salinger wrote a teenager like that. I'm Sarah.
I'm Jake. And I have to be honest, this is the book I was most nervous about because everybody has an opinion. Either they loved it when they read it at school and it changed their life, or they found Holden insufferable and couldn't finish it, or, and this is the most interesting group, they loved it at 16 and now can't work out why they loved it because rereading it as an adult is a very different experience.
Which group are you in?
I loved it at 16. Genuinely loved it, felt seen by it in a way I couldn't explain, and then I reread it for this episode, and I had a much more complicated reaction, which I think is actually the most honest response you can have to this book.
Good. Because that's what we're going to talk about. Not whether Holden Caulfield is likable, not whether the book is overrated, but what Salinger is actually doing. What's underneath the voice, why it worked, what it cost the man who wrote it, and why 1 million copies still sell every year.
1 million copies a year.
Every year. Since 1951. That is not a book that got lucky. That is a book that is doing something to readers that they cannot stop needing. So, The Catcher in the Rye, the narrator is Holden Caulfield, 16 years old. He is telling us his story from what we gradually work out is a psychiatric facility. He has ended up there after what the novel covers, about 48 hours in New York City after being expelled from his 4th prep school.
His 4th.
His 4th, Pensy Prep in Pennsylvania. He's been failing every subject except English. He's been told to leave after Christmas. And instead of going home to his parents' apartment on the Upper East Side, he decides to go to New York for a few days and not tell them. He has money. His grandmother sends him money for his birthday regularly, and he always has some. And he checks into a hotel and wanders the city and gets into a series of mostly uncomfortable encounters with adults. And he drinks too much, and he calls people, and he can't quite make anything happen. And he ends up breaking into his parents' apartment to say goodbye to his little sister, Phoebe. And Phoebe is the best person in the novel.
Tell me about Phoebe.
Phoebe is 10 years old. She is the opposite of Holden in almost every way. Grounded, direct, emotionally intelligent, capable of calling Holden on his nonsense. When Holden sneaks into the apartment and wakes her up, her first question is, "Daddy's going to kill you." Her second question is, "What did you do this time?" She already knows he's been expelled. She knows her brother. And then she does something devastating. She rolls over and buries her face in the pillow and says, "You didn't like anything. You don't like 1 million things." And she's right, and Holden knows she's right. And it's the first time in the novel that anyone actually sees him clearly.
And the carousel, because that's the ending.
The carousel in Central Park. Holden has planned to run away, to hitchhike out west and live in a cabin and not talk to anyone. And Phoebe refuses to let him go alone. She shows up at the museum where he's told her to meet him, with a suitcase, wearing his hunting cap, ready to go with him. And Holden cannot leave. He cannot be the reason his little sister runs away. So he takes her to the park instead and puts her on the carousel. And he stands in the rain and watches her go around. And he starts to cry. Not from sadness exactly. From something he can't name. And he says he was damn near bawling, and that's the emotional release the whole novel has been building to. A boy standing in the rain watching his little sister go around on a carousel.
That's a completely different ending to what I remembered.
Most people remember the running away plan. Most people forget the carousel. And the carousel matters enormously because It's about Holden finally accepting something he has been fighting the entire novel. The gold ring on the carousel. Children reach for it as they go round, and if they fall, they fall. And Holden says, you have to let them grab for the gold ring. You have to let them fall. You can't catch everyone. You can't keep everyone innocent. Growing up isn't something that happens to people against their will. It's something they have to do.
And the title.
The title. Early in the novel, Holden sees a little boy in the street singing to himself, "If a body catch a body coming through the rye," which is a line from a Robert Burns poem. And Holden misremembers it. He thinks the line is, "If a body catch a body coming through the rye." And he builds a fantasy around it. He imagines a field of rye at the edge of a cliff, thousands of children playing in it. And his job is to stand at the edge and catch any child who runs toward the cliff before they fall off. That's what he wants to be. The catcher in the rye, someone who saves children from falling into adulthood, someone who protects innocence.
Which is impossible.
Completely impossible. And the carousel is the moment he understands that. You can't catch everyone. You can't keep children in the rye forever. You can't stop the world from being the world. And standing in the rain, watching Phoebe reach for the gold ring, he accepts that. And for the first time in the novel, he is at peace.
And then he ends up in the psychiatric facility.
He collapses physically. He's been running in the rain. He's been drinking for days. He hasn't slept properly. And his parents find out, and he ends up getting treatment. And the novel is him narrating from there, looking back. And critically, he doesn't tell us what he's learned. He says he won't bore us with all that David Copperfield kind of crap, which is the same energy as the opening. He hasn't transformed into a different person. He's just Holden, telling you what happened, letting you figure out what it means.
Let's walk through what actually happens in those 48 hours in New York. Because the plot of Catcher is often reduced to kid wanders around feeling alienated, and that's technically accurate, but it misses what Salinger is doing with each encounter.
Every encounter in New York is the same test. Holden meets an adult or a near adult and tries to make a genuine human connection. And every single time, it fails. Not always because the other person is bad. Sometimes because Holden sabotages it. Sometimes because the world genuinely is what he says it is. And the accumulation of those failures is what drives him toward collapse.
The nuns. Because those are the people he responds to best.
He meets two nuns at a lunch counter. He's eating breakfast alone. And he ends up talking to them about literature and donating $10 to their collection basket. And then immediately worries he was being condescending. And those nuns are the people he feels most comfortable with in the entire novel, because they're not performing anything. They're just doing their work. They don't have pretensions. They're not trying to impress anyone.
And then the opposite, the disastrous date with Sally Hayes.
Sally Hayes is the girlfriend he calls up and takes to a show and then to the ice rink at Rockefeller Center. And it's going fine. It's actually going well. They're having a nice time. And then Holden proposes that they run away together, that they rent a cabin in New England and live there and get married. And Sally quite reasonably points out that this is insane and they're 16, they don't have money, the plan makes no sense. And Holden gets angry. He calls her a pain in the ass. He's horrible to her. And she leaves.
And Holden knows he was wrong.
He knows it immediately. That's the thing about Holden. He's always self-aware enough to know when he's been awful. He just can't stop himself. The proposal to Sally is completely genuine. He wants to escape. He wants someone to escape with. He wants something real and simple and outside the world that's suffocating him. But he can't explain that. He just blurts out the plan and then can't bear being told no. And Sally goes home. And Holden goes to a bar.
And then the prostitute, because that scene is widely misunderstood.
The hotel scene. A lift operator named Maurice offers to send a girl to his room for $5. And Holden says yes, not because he wants sex, but because he's lonely and he thinks maybe talking to someone will help. And Sunny arrives. She's clearly very young, and she's clearly doing this work under duress. And Holden immediately feels terrible. He can't go through with it. He tries to talk to her instead. He pays her the $5 and asks her to leave. And she comes back later with Maurice and they shake him down for more money. And Maurice hits him. And Holden lies on the bathroom floor after they leave, feeling like he's dying, fantasizing about being shot, and staggering out to confront Maurice with his intestines hanging out.
Which is dark, but also very funny.
It's very funny. Holden's fantasies are always very cinematic and overdramatic, and he knows it. The self-awareness is always there. But the point of the prostitute scene is that Holden can't even do something that is supposed to be simple and transactional without turning it into an emotional situation. He looks at Sunny and sees a person in a bad situation and feels responsible for her. He cannot turn off the empathy, even when it would be much easier to just participate in the transaction and go to sleep.
And then the call to Mr. Antolini, which is the most complicated encounter.
Mr. Antolini was a teacher at a previous school who Holden genuinely respected, one of the few adults he trusts. And he calls him late at night, and Antolini invites him over. And Antolini gives him a bed and stays up talking with him. And the talk is actually helpful. Antolini tells him that what he's experiencing, this sense of falling and not being able to stop, is something that other people have written about, that it's not unique to Holden, that there are words for it and people who have navigated it. And Holden falls asleep, and then he wakes up, and Antolini is sitting next to him in the dark, stroking his hair.
And Holden panics and leaves.
He grabs his bags and says he has to go and leaves immediately. And the novel is ambiguous about whether Antolini was doing something inappropriate or whether Holden, with his extreme sensitivity and his history of encounters going wrong, misread something innocent. Salinger doesn't tell you. Holden himself isn't sure. He wonders afterward whether he was wrong to leave. And this ambiguity is deliberate because the novel is about a person whose trust in adults has been so thoroughly eroded that even a genuine moment of care reads as threatening. Even the person who was actually trying to help him becomes someone he runs from.
And he ends up sleeping on a bench in Grand Central.
In the middle of winter. Because he's run out of options and run out of money, and he's too proud and too broken to go home. And that's the low point before the carousel, before Phoebe.
Everyone knows the phonies thing. Holden calls everything phony constantly. Adults are phony. School is phony. Movies are phony. Social occasions are phony. And it's easy to dismiss that as adolescent cynicism. But is there something more going on?
Much more. Holden is not just being a cynical teenager. He has a very precise and consistent definition of phoniness. Something is phony when the appearance and the reality don't match. When people perform emotions they don't feel, or values they don't hold, or identities that aren't genuine. When the surface is presented as the substance, and Holden's hypersensitivity to this, his inability to participate in the performance even when it would serve him, is both his greatest quality and the thing that is destroying him.
Because you can't live in the adult world without performing.
You can't. The adult world runs on performance, on saying the right thing at the right time, on maintaining the right social surface, on suppressing the reality of what you feel in favor of what is appropriate. And Holden cannot do it. He blurts things out. He says the wrong thing. He calls people out when they're being fake and then immediately feels bad about it. He starts conversations he can't finish. He makes calls to people and hangs up when they answer. He is absolutely unable to perform adulthood, not because he's stupid or immature, but because something in him refuses.
And the dead brother, Allie.
Allie is everything. Allie is Holden's younger brother who died of leukemia when he was 11 and Holden was 13. And Allie was, in Holden's telling, perfect, genuinely good, smart, kind, funny, everything. And he died anyway, and Holden cannot make peace with that. He cannot accept a world in which genuinely good people die while all the phonies flourish. The night Allie died, Holden slept in the garage and broke all the windows with his fists. He broke every window in the garage. His hands still hurt sometimes. And that image, a 13-year-old boy alone in a garage in the dark, bleeding, destroying everything he could reach because his brother was dead. That's the wound the whole novel is sitting on top of.
And he never talks about it directly.
He never talks about it in the way you'd expect. He mentions it obliquely, repeatedly, the way you mention something you can't stop thinking about but can't look at directly. He carries Allie's baseball mitt everywhere. It's covered in poems Allie wrote in green ink, so he'd have something to read when he was waiting in the outfield. And Holden has it. He always has it. It's the most honest thing in the novel, like this dead child's baseball mitt covered in poems. And Holden almost never talks about it directly.
There's also a reading of the novel as a war novel in disguise, which I didn't know until I researched this episode.
This is the reading that changes everything. The biographers David Shields and Shane Salerno argue that The Catcher in the Rye is fundamentally a war novel in disguise. That Holden's symptoms, the dissociation, the inability to connect, the sudden floods of emotion, the physical collapse, the psychiatric hospital, are the symptoms of combat trauma, not Holden's trauma, Salinger's.
Because Salinger stormed Utah Beach.
Salinger landed at Utah Beach on D-Day, June the 6th, 1944, with 6 chapters of The Catcher in the Rye in his pack. He carried them as a talisman. Of the 3,080 troops who landed with his regiment that day, only 1,130 were alive 3 weeks later. Salinger fought through 5 major campaigns in Europe. He helped liberate the Kaufering concentration camp, a subcamp of Dachau, in April 1945. He saw mass graves. He saw what had been done to those people. And he said later that you could live a lifetime and never really get the smell of burning flesh out of your nose.
And then he had a breakdown.
In July 1945, a few months after the end of the war in Europe, Salinger checked himself into an army hospital in Nuremberg, Germany. He was treated for what they then called battle fatigue, what we now call PTSD. His hands shook. He had nightmares. He couldn't sleep. He wrote letters home that his daughter later described as in handwriting that had become totally unrecognizable. The breakdown was severe and it was real. And when he came home and eventually published The Catcher in the Rye in 1951, he had embedded the trauma of combat into the inner life of a 16-year-old boy. Holden isn't a veteran, but Holden's symptoms are the symptoms of someone who has seen something they cannot unsee.
The ducks in Central Park.
The ducks. Holden is obsessed throughout the novel with a single question that he asks everyone he meets. Do you know where the ducks go in winter? The lagoon in Central Park freezes over and the ducks disappear. Where do they go? Nobody knows. Nobody has thought about it. And Holden cannot stop thinking about it. And on the surface, it's a quirky character detail. But the ducks are innocents. They are the things that disappear from the world, and nobody knows where they go, and nobody seems to care enough to find out. Allie disappeared. Where did he go? The answer is nowhere satisfying, and the world just carried on without him. And Holden cannot make peace with that.
And the Museum of Natural History.
The museum. Holden loves the Museum of Natural History because the exhibits never change. The Eskimo fishing through the same hole in the ice, the deer drinking from the same pool, everything exactly as it was the last time you came. No matter how much you change between visits, the museum stays the same. And Holden wants the world to be like the museum. He wants some things to stay fixed. He wants innocence to be preservable. And it isn't. And the novel is about learning that it isn't. Very painfully.
So who is Salinger? Because he is one of the great mysteries of American literature.
Jerome David Salinger. Born January the 1st, 1919 in New York City. His father was a wealthy Jewish cheese and meat importer. His mother was Scotch-Irish and had converted to Judaism. He grew up on the Upper West Side, then the Upper East Side, in exactly the world he later wrote about. Prep schools, Manhattan apartments, privilege. He was an average student. His parents sent him to several schools, finally settling on the Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania in 1934, which is clearly the model for Pensy Prep. He graduated. He spent time at various colleges, New York University, Ursinus, Columbia, without graduating from any of them. At Columbia, he took a short story writing class taught by Whit Burnett, an editor, and discovered what he was for.
And then the war.
He was drafted in 1942. He'd already sold his first story in 1940, and he'd been writing seriously, publishing in Esquire and Collier's and the Saturday Evening Post. He brought a typewriter in his Jeep. He wrote under fire. There are accounts of him typing under a table while soldiers around him were seeking cover from artillery. He met Hemingway in Paris during the Liberation in 1944, and Hemingway read his work and encouraged him. And then the liberation of the concentration camp, and the breakdown, and the hospital in Nuremberg, and coming home changed.
There's a detail about him meeting a woman during the war, a German woman.
Sylvia. He met a German woman named Sylvia Welter during his time in post-war Germany and married her within months. She came back to America with him. They separated within 8 months. Almost nothing is known about her. Salinger never spoke about the marriage publicly, but the speed of it and the speed of its dissolution suggests a man who was not in a stable state when he made the decision. He was traumatized and he was trying to hold himself together, and this is the period in which he was also finishing The Catcher in the Rye.
The book was nearly not published.
The first publisher who received the manuscript rejected it. The head of the trade division asked, "Is Holden Caulfield supposed to be crazy?" And Salinger, who had recently stepped out of a psychiatric hospital himself, found that question devastating. He teared up in the meeting. He was deeply hurt. His agent took it elsewhere, to Little Brown, who published it in July 1951. And it was an immediate bestseller.
And then Salinger ran.
Very much like Holden. The fame terrified him. The attention appalled him. He gave a few interviews in the early 1950s, sat for a few photographs. There's an iconic dust jacket photo of him, young and handsome and slightly sad-looking, and then he moved to Cornish, New Hampshire in 1953, and essentially never came back. He published 3 more slim books over the next decade, 9 stories, Franny and Zoe and the Glass Novellas, and his last published story appeared in The New Yorker in 1965. After that, silence. He lived in Cornish until he died in 2010. He never gave another proper interview. He rarely left the house.
But he wasn't just sitting there doing nothing.
He was writing. He said so in the rare moments anyone got close enough to ask. He wrote every day. He had a small studio on his property specifically for writing, and his family, after his death in 2010, announced that they expect to release unpublished works over the next decade. So there is apparently a body of work sitting in a vault somewhere. What form it takes, whether it's any good, whether it will match what he published, nobody knows. But he kept writing for 45 years after his last published story, which is its own kind of extraordinary thing.
The spirituality, because Salinger's retreat to Cornish makes more sense in that context.
He was deeply involved in Eastern religion and philosophy for most of his adult life. Zen Buddhism, Vedanta, the Hindu philosophical tradition, and the later work, Franny and Zoe, the Glass family novellas, are explicitly about spiritual crisis and spiritual seeking. The question of how to live authentically in a world that is largely fake, which is also Holden's question, becomes in the Glass stories a specifically spiritual question. Can you be in the world without being of it? Can you love something or someone without being corrupted by the attachment?
And the young women.
Which is the dark side of the Salinger biography that you can't ignore. There's a pattern. After his divorce from Sylvia, Salinger consistently formed relationships with very young women, often teenagers, always significantly younger than him. The most documented is Joyce Maynard. In 1972, Maynard was 18 years old, a freshman at Yale, and had just published a piece in the New York Times about growing up. Salinger wrote to her, a long personal letter, from his compound in Cornish, and a correspondence began. And within months she had dropped out of Yale, given up a summer job at the New York Times, and moved into his house.
She was 18, he was 53.
He was 53, and the relationship lasted about 9 months, after which he told her to pack her things and leave. Just like that. She published a memoir about it in 1998, At Home in the World, and described the experience of being controlled, isolated, groomed. Salinger's rules for her included Don't trust doctors, don't trust psychologists, don't trust what you read in the New York Times, don't trust food cooked above a certain temperature. He was dismantling her ability to think independently. And when she was no longer useful or interesting to him, he discarded her. She later wrote, in connection with the Me Too movement, that she had been groomed to be the sexual partner of a narcissist who nearly derailed her life.
And Maynard later discovered this was a pattern.
There were others. Other young women, other similar dynamics. The author of The Catcher in the Rye, the book about protecting innocence, about the horror of phoniness, about a boy who cannot bear the predatory nature of adult sexuality, was himself a man who repeatedly pursued very young women and used his fame and his mystique to manipulate them, which is a devastating irony. And it doesn't cancel the novel. The novel is extraordinary regardless of who wrote it, but it changes how you read the man who wrote it, and I think you have to hold both things, the extraordinary book and the troubling biography, without letting either one cancel the other.
That's a genuinely difficult thing to do.
It is. And it's the same difficulty we face with a lot of great art and complicated artists. The question of whether you can separate the work from the life doesn't have a clean answer. But in Salinger's case particularly, given that the book is so explicitly about the protection of innocence and the horror of adult predation, the gap between what he wrote and how he lived is one of the more uncomfortable contradictions in American literary history.
The Catcher in the Rye has been banned more times than almost any other book in American history, and simultaneously has been one of the most assigned novels in American schools, both things at once.
It held the dubious distinction, this is a 1979 study, of being at once the most frequently censored book in the country and the second most frequently taught novel in public high schools. After Of Mice and Men, only Of Mice and Men was assigned more often, and parents were counting the profanity. 237 goddams, 58 bastards, 31 Christsakes, and 1 incident of flatulence.
Someone counted all the goddams.
An angry parent counted all the goddams, and teachers were fired for assigning it in the 1970s, and it kept being assigned, because the teachers who love this book, and there are many of them, believe it does something for adolescent readers that nothing else does. It says your alienation is real. Your sense that the adult world is full of performance and dishonesty is real. You are not alone in feeling it. And that validation is genuinely powerful for a certain kind of teenage reader.
And then there's the darker association. John Lennon's killer had a copy. Reagan's would-be assassin had a copy.
Mark David Chapman shot John Lennon in December 1980. He was found standing over Lennon's body, reading The Catcher in the Rye. He had a copy in his pocket. He later told police he identified completely with Holden Caulfield, that the large part of him was Holden. And at his sentencing, when the judge asked if he had anything to say, he read aloud The Catcher in the Rye passage. The fantasy about standing at the edge of the cliff and catching the children. And John Hinckley Jr., who shot Ronald Reagan in 1981, also had a copy. And the book spent the 1980s accumulating this association with a particular kind of violent, isolated male loner who felt that the world had wronged him and that Holden Caulfield understood.
Which is a grotesque misreading.
Completely grotesque. Holden Caulfield does not shoot anyone. He cannot bear violence. He is disgusted by cruelty. He cries easily. He is consumed by love for his little sister. He is one of the most emotionally open, emotionally honest characters in American fiction. The men who killed people while claiming Holden as their icon had taken from the book only the alienation and the sense of being surrounded by phonies, and used those feelings to justify violence that Holden would have found incomprehensible and horrifying. It's like reading Hamlet and deciding the point is that you should kill people. You have missed everything.
But the association stuck.
It stuck, and it did the book enormous harm. For a generation of readers who came to it after the Lennon shooting, the book was pre-tainted. You were reading the book the killer was reading. And Salinger, already reclusive, Already deeply uncomfortable with the fame the book had brought him, she retreated further. He never spoke publicly about either killing. He never addressed the association. He just went back to Cornish and kept writing and refused to engage with what his book had become in the culture.
He said he spent 10 years writing the book and the rest of his life regretting it.
That's from the biography by Shields and Salerno. He was sorry he'd written it, apparently, or at least that it had been published, because the privacy it cost him was total. He had made something that millions of people felt was personally addressed to them, and then he couldn't go anywhere without being found. He couldn't be a private person. And for a man who wanted privacy more than almost anything, that was unbearable.
Let's talk about what Salinger wrote after Catcher, because 9 Stories is brilliant and Franny and Zoe is underrated.
9 Stories, published 1953, is the other essential Salinger text. It contains For Esme with Love and Squalor, which is the most direct fictional treatment of his wartime experience. A soldier about to go to D-Day meets a young English girl in a tea shop in Devon and has a brief, genuine conversation with her. And the second half of the story is set after the war. A different soldier, obviously Salinger in a different guise, in a hotel room in Germany, completely broken down. And a package arrives from Esme, the girl from the tea shop. She has sent him her dead father's watch, and it's an act of faith so small and so pure that it begins, tentatively, to reach him. That story is about what it takes to be reached when you are that far gone. And the answer is something genuine and innocent and given without calculation.
Which is exactly what Phoebe is for Holden.
Exactly. Salinger keeps writing the same story. A traumatized person, closed off from the world, unreachable by the ordinary mechanisms of adult life, reached by a child or a very young person who offers something genuine. Esme and Holden and Phoebe and the nuns and Franny Glass, they're all variations on the same figure. The innocent who sees clearly, the person who hasn't yet learned to perform.
Tell me about Franny Glass.
Franny Glass is a college student who is having a breakdown. She has become obsessed with a Russian spiritual text called The Way of a Pilgrim, about a man who prays ceaselessly. And she has started to find everything fake. Her boyfriend Lane is insufferable in the way that a certain kind of smart, competitive college man is insufferable. He's proud of his paper on Flaubert. He orders snails to impress people. And Franny watches him and feels sick. Not just a stomachache kind of sick. A fundamental, I cannot continue to participate in this world, sick. And she faints in the restaurant and goes home to her family. And the Glass family is enormous and brilliant and damaged. And her brother Zoe tries to reach her, and the way he reaches her is by pointing to something genuine, something real underneath the performance.
Which is the same thing Salinger is doing in every book.
He's writing the same novel in different keys. Catcher is the major key version. Loud, funny, heartbreaking. 9 Stories is the minor key, quiet, devastating, precise. Franny and Zoe is somewhere in between, domestic, funny, spiritual. But the underlying argument is the same in all of them. The world is full of performance and phoniness, and it is making people sick. And the cure is not therapy or medication or professional help. It's a moment of genuine human contact, a real thing given freely, a child's faith, an old woman's unselfconscious kindness, a sister on a carousel.
And he stopped. After the Glass novellas in 1963, nothing. For 47 years until he died.
Because what he'd written was enough. It's a small body of work. 1 novel, 1 story collection, 2 books of novellas. But every piece of it is doing something that nothing else does quite as well. And Catcher, despite everything, despite the killers and the banning and the Salinger biography and the difficulty of rereading it as an adult, Catcher is still the one that keeps finding new readers, the one that keeps making people feel seen, the 1 million copies a year.
1 million copies a year, still, in 2026. Why?
Because the condition Holden describes, that specific combination of hypersensitivity, alienation, inability to perform the social contract, grief that can't be processed, love that can't be expressed, that condition doesn't go away. Every generation produces teenagers who feel that the world is full of phonies and they can't make themselves be one. Every generation produces readers who open this book and feel, this is me. This is exactly me. Someone wrote this for me.
And the voice. Because the voice is the mechanism.
The voice is almost everything. Salinger invented a new way of writing a teenage narrator. Before Catcher, first-person narrators were generally reliable, eloquent, properly punctuated. Holden is repetitive. He says and all and everything after almost every sentence. He contradicts himself. He says something and then immediately says he doesn't know why he said it. He trails off. He starts stories he doesn't finish. He tells you not to take his word for things. And the effect of all of this is that you trust him completely, because that's what actual thought sounds like, not the polished retrospective version of thought, the actual process.
Salinger basically invented the unreliable adolescent narrator as a literary form.
And everything that followed is in conversation with that. Every young adult novel that features a teenage narrator telling you their thoughts in their actual voice, that lineage runs through Salinger. Without Catcher, there's no perks of being a wallflower. There's no speak. There's probably no normal people. The idea that a young person's interior voice is interesting enough to be the whole of a novel, Salinger established that.
And the actual craft of the writing, because the voice is so strong, you stop noticing how precise it is.
Salinger is one of the most technically accomplished writers in American literature, and he hides it completely. The Holden voice feels effortless and spontaneous. It's not. Every hesitation is placed. Every contradiction is deliberate. Every time Holden says an all and everything he's doing something rhythmically, he's slowing the sentence down. He's mimicking the way thought trails off when you're not quite sure what you're trying to say. And the effect is intimacy. You feel like you're inside someone's head, not being told a story, being thought at.
And the repetition, because Holden says things like, it was really nice, it really was, that doubling back.
The doubling back is crucial. It's the way people actually talk when they're being honest. You say something and then you check yourself, you verify it, you make sure you meant it. It killed me. It really did. That really killed me. The italics, when they appear, are doing emotional work. They're showing you where the feeling is, and Salinger uses them sparingly enough that when they appear, you feel them. The whole voice is calibrated with extraordinary precision to feel completely uncalibrated.
There's always the comparison to Huckleberry Finn, because that's the other great American novel narrated by a young person on the run from a world that doesn't fit them.
And it's the right comparison. Twain published Huckleberry Finn in 1884, and Salinger knew it deeply. Both novels are narrated by a boy who can't fit into the world as it is. Both boys are running, Huck down the Mississippi, Holden around Manhattan. Both are looking for something real in a world full of performance and cruelty. Both have a companion they love and are trying to protect. Jim for Huck, Phoebe for Holden. And both novels are about America, about what the country promises and what it actually delivers. Huck's America is slavery and violence and frontier hypocrisy. Holden's America is post-war prosperity and conformity, and the suppression of anything authentic in favor of the surface.
Different centuries, same complaint.
Same complaint. And the fact that both novels are still being read, still being taught, still being argued over, suggests the complaint is legitimate. America has always had this gap between what it says it is and what it actually is. And the writers who point at that gap with the most precision and the most feeling are the ones who endure. Twain did it from the outside, from a river, from physical distance. Salinger does it from the inside, from a hotel room, from the streets of the city that formed him. The method is different. The target is the same.
The name. Holden Caulfield, because apparently it's significant.
The name is doing work. Holden, hold on. He's trying to hold on to something that keeps slipping away. Caulfield. Caul is the membrane that sometimes covers a baby's face at birth. It's considered lucky in some traditions, a sign that the child is protected. and field, the field of rye. The children playing, the thing he wants to protect. He's the protective membrane over the field. He's the call. He's trying to be the thing that keeps innocence safe from the world. And of course he can't. Nobody can. The call breaks. The children grow up. The field is just a field. And the name, chosen by a man who knew exactly what every word in his novel was doing, is one last piece of evidence that The Catcher in the Rye is not the casual, slapped-together, accidentally brilliant book its voice suggests. It is a completely deliberate work of art that spent a decade being made and will spend many more decades being read.
The modern parallel, mental health.
Holden Caulfield in 2026 would almost certainly be in therapy. He would probably have a diagnosis: depression, PTSD from his brother's death, anxiety disorder. He would have a language for what he's experiencing that the 1950s didn't provide. And the question the novel asks, which is still the right question, it is whether the language is enough, whether naming what's wrong with you actually fixes it, whether the diagnosis is the thing that saves you or just another label that other people use to process you. Holden ends up in a psychiatric facility. He gets treatment. And we don't know if it helps. The novel is deliberately silent on what happens next. Because Salinger isn't interested in recovery narratives. He's interested in the experience of being the person who cannot make themselves work in the world as it currently is. And whether that's a pathology or a moral position, or both. And that question, unanswered in 1951, unanswered now, is why the book keeps selling.
Is it a moral position? Because I go back and forth on this.
I think Salinger is deliberately ambiguous about it. Holden's refusal to perform adulthood, his inability to say the thing that is expected, to smile when he's supposed to smile, to participate in the social contract, that refusal is both what's destroying him and what's most valuable about him. The world would be a genuinely worse place if everyone was like Holden. And the world would be a genuinely better place if more people shared his sensitivity to dishonesty, his love of genuine things, his willingness to be emotionally present even when it's completely inappropriate. He's a catastrophe, and he's the most alive person in every room he enters.
That's the thing I'd forgotten, how alive he is.
He is completely, exhaustingly alive. Every moment of every page. He notices everything. He feels everything. He can't filter anything. And reading him as an adult, I found myself thinking, yes, the world he's describing is full of phonies. And also, the world needs people who can function in it even when it's imperfect. And also, the fact that Holden can't function is not his fault. It's the result of a grief he was never helped to process. All three things are true simultaneously. And that's why the book holds up. It doesn't resolve, it just holds.
And the series thread. Because Catcher sits in a very specific place in what we've been building.
We've been tracing a thread about visibility and invisibility. Who gets seen? Who gets to have an inner life that the world acknowledges? Frankenstein's monster is denied humanity entirely. Tom Robinson is killed by a system that refuses to see him. Esther Greenwood's intelligence is invisible to the world that wants to reduce her to a social function. The Invisible Man writes from underground because every institution he enters refuses to see him as a full person. And now Holden, who is also invisible in his own way, he's a wealthy white boy in 1950s New York, which means he's the most visible category of person there is, and yet nobody sees him. His parents barely register his presence. His teachers are baffled by him. The adults he encounters either want something from him or are performing something at him. And the only people who actually see Holden are children. The nuns, Phoebe, a kid on the street singing to himself. Innocence sees clearly. Adulthood is blind.
Which means the series has been building to a question. What happens when the person who sees clearly can't, who refuses the performance, who insists on the real thing? What happens when that person tries to come back? After the breakdown, after the underground, after the carousel, what comes next?
And that's where we're going. The thread continues.
Should people read it if they haven't? And should people who hated it try again?
Read it if you haven't. But read it knowing it's not what the reputation says it is. It's not the book of teenage rebellion. It's not the book that inspired killers. It's a book about grief and trauma and the specific agony of loving the world too much to tolerate how the world actually is. Read it with that in mind, and it's one of the most honest novels ever written. And it's short. You can read it in an afternoon. You have no excuse.
And for people who hated Holden,
give it 5 more years and try again. Because the reader you are at 25 is different from the reader you are at 16. And the reader you are at 35 is different again. Every rereading of this book is a rereading of yourself at whatever age you first read it. And that's a strange and useful mirror to hold up. What did you love about it then? What irritates you now that didn't then? What do you understand now that went over your head the first time? Those gaps are where the interesting conversation is.
and the people who loved it at 16 and are scared to go back.
Go back. It's better than you remember, and harder than you remember, and different from what you remember. The voice is even more extraordinary when you know what you're looking at. The grief is more visible, the damage is more legible, and Phoebe on the carousel will still get you. I promise it will still get you. The carousel is the scene that survives every rereading. It is the emotional truth the whole book is built around. Don't let anyone tell you the novel is just a portrait of a difficult teenager. It is a portrait of grief and what grief does to a person when it has nowhere to go.
Link is in the show notes. Amazon affiliate, no extra cost to you. And the Audible link is down there too if you want to hear the voice rather than read it.
The audiobook lands differently than the page. Holden's voice read aloud, worth experiencing both ways. And for what it's worth, the audiobook readers who have narrated Catcher over the years have all had to solve the same problem. How do you read a voice that sounds spontaneous without making it sound performed? It's the central paradox of the novel made physical. Every narrator who has tried it has landed somewhere slightly different. Find the one that works for you.
We're 7 episodes in, and we're finding the shape of this series. If you've been with us from the start, you can feel the thread running through everything we've covered. Next episode, we follow it somewhere new. Something that connects directly to what Holden is running from, and what happens when that running leads somewhere unexpected. The series is going somewhere deliberate, and we think you're going to feel it when we get there.
And as always, if you have thoughts about the show, books you want us to cover, things we're getting right or wrong, tell us. Leave a comment. We're new at this, and we genuinely mean it when we say your feedback matters. Every comment, every suggestion, every book recommendation, we read them all. We're building this alongside you. A like and a subscribe helps more than you know when you're just starting out, and we appreciate every single one. Thanks for being here. It means more than you know. I'm Sarah.
I'm Jake. Thanks for listening to Between the Covers. We'll be back next week with something that picks up exactly where this leaves off. The thread does not break, it keeps going. I hear, I see, I learn, and so does Holden eventually.